Welcome to another episode of The Dissection. There is a lot of drama today pertaining to the Bela Bill. The Minister of Basic Education is boycotting the signing of the Bela Bill. Helen Zille has gone on record saying that the Bela Bill is a red line for her party.
The Bela Bill is quite a contentious one as well for the Democratic Alliance. And the Democratic Alliance, of course, didn't support that. What happens to the Bela Bill now? Is it something that you're going to put on the agenda of the national dialogue?
Well, the Bela Bill is a non-negotiable for us, the right of school governing bodies to determine the language policy of a school is a red line for us, and the ANC's been aware of that from.
The Democratic Alliance has issued a statement a few days ago about this issue, where it said that they're urging President Ramaphosa to halt the Bela Bill, and they've warned that it's a threat to the government of national unity. Let me read their statement to you. The DA has learned that President Ramaphosa intends to sign the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill into law on Friday the 13th of September. 13th of September, Friday the 13th of September. Friday the 13th. Is it going to be one of those days? If he proceeds, despite the DA's strong objections, he will violate both the letter and the spirit of the joint statement of intent that informs the basis of the government of national unity. During the negotiations, the DA made it clear that the Bela Bill was unacceptable to us in its current form because it has unconstitutional implications for the right to mother tongue education, amongst other issues. The DA urged President Ramaphosa to send the bill back to Parliament for a few simple amendments to bring it in line with the Constitution. Despite this, and in violation of the provisions of the Statement of Intent, the President seems intent on pushing ahead unilaterally. I have moved urgently to meet the President, this is from John Steenhuisen, before Friday to reiterate our objections in the strongest terms. I will also submit to him the simple amendment that the DA requires and urge him to use his powers to send the bill back to Parliament. If the President continues to ride roughshod over these objections, he is endangering the future of the government of national unity and destroying the good faith on which it was based. The establishment of a dispute resolution mechanism must now be a priority to ensure that all parties uphold both the letter and spirit of the statement of intent, and that the ANC understands that they can no longer take unilateral action on issues that affect fundamental rights. The DA regards this issue in the most serious light, and I will convey to the President the destructive implications it holds for the future of the GNU. This is obviously the position that has been taken by John Steenhuisen and the Democratic Alliance. But Fikile Mbalula has actually responded in part to this and said that the Democratic Alliance can walk away if they want to walk. And this is what he had to say.
Since civil society rising, that this bill must be signed. The President's office have said, Friday, we are signing. After they sign, I will be here on behalf of the ANC to talk about how important is that bill for South Africa's transformation. I'm not a spokesperson of the DA. They can do whatever they want to do. If they want to walk, they can walk. If they want to do whatever they want to do that they deem it fit in their own perspective, it works for them, they can do that. But it doesn't mean that we cannot talk as members of the GNU and political parties who are in the GNU. We will talk and engage. And I suppose even at that level, the President, I saw yesterday, he met with leaders of the GNU, and that's how it is. It is going to be like that for as much as we are in this GNU. It will not stop with Bela, because we did not win outright majority. If we won outright majority, there will be no threats here. Otherwise, the threats we know of, they would have gone and exhausted other options, including going to the courts and all of that. So we are agreed in terms of the statement of intent to cooperate and to work together. So we don't just dismiss each other.
In spite of all of the pushback from the Democratic Alliance, in spite of the boycotting of the signing by the Minister of Basic Education, Siviwe Kgorube, of the Democratic Alliance. President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the bill today. And as he was signing the bill, he actually addressed some of the issues and gave the DA a little bit of a way out So we'll talk about that way out, but let's listen to some of the remarks he made specifically about the differences of opinion and how he's going to resolve them.
However, as president, I'm prepared to open a window for consultation for a limited period on 2 clauses. And I've therefore decided that having signed the bill must now proceed to be implemented, and I'm glad that the Minister of Basic Education has clearly said that once signed, this becomes the law of the Republic, and the department, meaning herself, the Deputy Minister, and the department will go ahead and implement. The date of implementation, of course, the commencement to implement is a date that needs to be set. So implementation on signing should start immediately. However, I have said as president, I am willing to allow those who do believe that a solution will be found to the 2 clauses that they believe they have solutions for, to give them the opportunity. So I've decided to delay the implementation for clauses 4 and 5 of the bill by a period of 3 months. The rest of the act is implemented immediately. For 3 months, I allow 4 and 5 to have those engagements. This will give the parties time to deliberate on these issues and make proposals on how the different views may be accommodated. Should the parties not be able to agree, I want to make this clear, should the parties not be able to agree on an approach, then we will proceed with the full implementation of all the parts of the bill within a 3-month period.
So which clauses are these clauses that the president gave them some leeway to provide solutions to? Clause 3, right? Clause 3 relates to the interpretation of Section 4A, which deals with the issue of, let me read it. Clause 3, insertion of Section 4A. This clause seeks the insertion of Section 4A into the Schools Act to ensure that educators, principals, and school governing bodies are accountable and responsible for the learners and their care, enrollment of learners, and their regular and punctual attendance at a school. This also speaks about, just trying to see here. Yeah, this clause 3 speaks mostly about this issue of involvement of SGBs and enrollment. Then you've got clause 5. Clause 5 basically is the one about language. When it goes here to the relevant parts, which I think have been contested, the clause seeks to empower the HOD to direct a public school to adopt more than one language of instruction. And then it also goes further. So I'm going to make a detailed deep dive into this Bela Bill because there's a lot of controversy around now the Bela Act. But we'll do that later. So this is what the president has given 3 months of a window period to the DA to fix. Let's see if they'll take up that opportunity, but let's continue talking in detail now about the Bela Bill. So let's dial back a little bit and actually talk about this Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill before we discuss the political implications for the GNU in and of itself. The Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill is a piece of legislation in South Africa that seeks to amend the South African Schools Act, SASA, and the Employment of Educators Act of 1998, the EEA. Here's some first facts about public schools in South Africa. There are 12.7 million learners in public schools. There are 409,000 teachers in public schools, and there are 22,511 public schools. Of all of these public schools, about 28% of the schools are in quintiles 4 and 5. The schools are divided into 5 quintiles. And this is on the basis of the 1996 South African Schools Act, which provides for the public funding of schools. The funding model creates 5 categories of schools, which are called quintiles. The quintiles determine how much government funding each schools get. The schools in the lower quintiles, 1 to 3, are declared no-fee schools and do not charge school fees. These schools get the majority of the government funding. Schools in quintiles 4 and 5 receive a small amount of funding from the government and are therefore allowed to charge for school fees. The school fees are determined by the parents of the school. Section 39 of the South African Schools Act empowers the parent body to determine at a general meeting the school fees to be charged at each public school. There is no cap on how much each school can charge for school fees. The amount is agreed by the parent body of the school. Now, what are the key changes that the Bela Bill proposes to make? Before I say that, I go on to that. Just want to point out that the apartheid regime focused its funding on the suburban schools where mostly white students went to. And the Bantu Education Act intended deliberately to deprive African children from accessing opportunities to learn. And the quintiles 1, 2, and 3 correspond with the schools which are located predominantly in rural areas and in the townships of South Africa. I just thought that was necessary to add. The key changes that are proposed by the Bela Bill include making grade R compulsory, which is pre-primary. The Bela Bill aims to include grade R as part of compulsory schooling. Number 2, revising school admission and language policies. The Bela Bill proposes transferring decision-making authority over admission and language policies from school governing bodies to the head of department. This change is intended to align with constitutional court rulings and promote wider access to education. The Bela Bill number 3 prohibits corporal punishment. The Bela Bill offers an expansive definition of corporal punishment to include any acts which seek to belittle, humiliate, threaten, induce fear, or ridicule the dignity and person of a learner. Number 4, clarifying admission of undocumented learners. The bill states that no learner may be denied admission to a school due to failure to provide documentation like birth certificates or valid residence permits. Number 5, regulating homeschooling. The Bela Bill adds regulations for parents who choose to homeschool their children, requiring them to apply to the head of department for registration. Right. So the Bela Bill has faced significant criticism from various stakeholders, primarily centered on concerns regarding the centralization of authority, fiscal implications, and the impact on school governance. Here are some of the key criticisms. On the centralization of authority, critics of the bill argue that the bill centralizes power in the hands of provincial education officials, undermining the autonomy of school governing bodies. This shift is seen as diminishing local community involvement in critical decisions regarding language and admission policies, which could lead to less responsive governance in schools. Fiscal impact, here's the criticism. There are concerns about the fiscal burden, the financial burden the implementation of the Bela Bill could impose on provincial budgets. Critics highlight that the bill lacks adequate funding provisions, potentially jeopardizing essential programs like the National School Nutrition Program and learner transport. On restrictions on homeschooling, the bill has been criticized for imposing excessive regulatory requirements on parents who wish to homeschool their children. Critics argue that these regulations limit parental choice and autonomy in education. Lack of public participation. Many stakeholders feel that public input has not been adequately considered in the bill's final form. Despite numerous submissions during public hearings, significant concerns remain unaddressed. This has led to accusations of insufficient engagement with the community. Right? So when you talk about this centralization thing a little bit more, there are concerns about putting power in the hands of the provincial education bureaucrats, particularly the heads of departments, over the school governing bodies and local communities, right? There's a perception that these people are going to abuse power, that they are relatively less efficient than the current school governing bodies, and that, they are not held accountable to the school community in the way that the school governing bodies are. People say that by vesting significant powers in unelected bureaucrats like heads of departments, the bill is diminishing the role of democratically elected school governing bodies and local communities in shaping education policies that impact them and their children directly. The Democratic Alliance has accused the ANC of rushing this bill through Parliament for political gain without properly addressing stakeholder concerns raised during public participation. This lack of comprehensive engagement is viewed as undermining the democratic process in and of itself. So those are the criticisms. What are the counterpoints that have been raised by ANC supporters, ANC members, academics who support this particular bill, or former, leaders in education, such as MECs of education? So number one, they've said that parents who opt to homeschool will still have the right to determine what they teach their children, so long as it is in the child's best interest. The parents accept full responsibility and the education envisioned is appropriate. Now, this is a fact check that came out from, I think, Section 27, trying to correct some of the criticisms. So I'm going to comment on these criticisms a little bit. That sentence, parents who opt to homeschool their children will still have the right to determine what they teach their children, so long as it is in the child's best interest and the education envisioned is appropriate, does shift a lot of power to the HOD. It does do that, because now there is a person who will say, these are the child's best interest, and that person is not the parent. And I think that there will be some concern about HODs, because first and foremost, what is your value system? Secondly, what is your prioritization? Finally, also, do you really care about this particular child? Some do, some don't necessarily. They're just in those jobs for, because for career purposes, they want to have employment. So while it's true that parents will still be able to do this, it does create additional paperwork for them to go through, and it does shift the final say into the hands of the HOD. So I think that even though there's pushback on that point, the criticisms are fair. And some parents don't want to have to continuously deal with government departments because they feel that those government departments are inefficient. And I don't think that's also unfair to raise as a point, because anybody who's tried to deal with the government department knows that there are consistent delays and problems across the board. Number two, the pushback or the counter arguments that have been raised, that is that the intention is not to control children's education, but to bring regulation to a sector to which for the most part has been unregulated. This is the homeschooling sector. I do think that there's need for regulation of the homeschooling sector. Should it be in this particular point? I don't know. I think that it's open to interpretation, but it's clear that the power now goes more into the government side than to the parents who are homeschooling. Also, not all parents homeschooling are good parents, and that's something that we have to be mindful of. There's got to be a system to check. What are you teaching these kids, etc.? There's got to be a system. But how do you deal with this bureaucratic nature of the policy? It's a question. On the school governing bodies, this is what they say. School governing bodies will maintain authority over language and admissions policies, subject to HOD approval, aligned with the Constitution, ensuring a non-arbitrary process. In this pushback, there's an assumption that school governing bodies have been making these determinations in an arbitrary fashion, which I don't think is a fair or objective assessment, because you would need to actually go to every school governing body and ask them, how did you determine your language policy, and then devise or compile data and then show it to the public to say, this is what we have ascertained. So this whole non-arbitrary process thing seems to me like it's not fair to the school governing bodies in and of themselves. But it's also very clear that they don't maintain authority if that authority is subject to HOD approval, right? And the HOD is the one who then determines whether their decision is aligned with the Constitution, meaning that the HOD can actually overrule the school's language and admission policies on the basis of a constitutional argument. That may be something that is okay, but we don't know if all HODs are going to do that diligently or are going to do it adequately. So in so much as the pushback is that SGBs are still school governing bodies, are still going to have authority, I think that they have diminished authority. So there are some other questions that comments that have been raised, which I think are fair to just bring to your attention. One of which is one which was raised by Sitale Khaugelo on Twitter. He said the DA and AfriForum are so worked up about the Bela Bill because of Afrikaans. Most public schools in the suburbs only have Afrikaans as the first additional language. You can't add your isiZulu, Sipedi, Tonga. I'm trying to say it right. Anyway, and because they're not offered. But if you look at the population composition of the school, you'll find that less than 15% of the learners are native Afrikaans speakers. Why is every learner then subjected to the Afrikaans language? I don't mind such in private schools, but having this in public schools in a democratic country is a shame. The so-called Democratic Alliance is against democracy. So this is the criticism around the language policy. And I think this criticism is fair to say some of this is just about protecting Afrikaans as a language medium in schools which may no longer be predominantly Afrikaans speaking. And maybe it's fair that there be discussions around what language should be spoken. So if a community changes in terms of its demographic nature in these Model C schools, because not Model C, but Quintile 4 and Quintile 5, which are former Model C schools, should that language then be changed? I think that is fair to bring up, to say schools which are in these areas don't have to just be English and Afrikaans medium schools. Other options should be offered. In private schools, typically they do teach a lot of languages because they can afford to hire a lot of language teachers. But in some of these, public schools, which are Quintile 4 and Quintile 5, the fee-paying public schools, they do charge a lot of money. They're not cheap, these schools, but they don't always have the capacity to hire a lot of language learners. So this debate, in part, is about issues around language, and I hope that you can see that. But in part, it's also about the role of school governing bodies and what kind of power and influence they should have on the nature and shape of their schools, which is why it's very contentious. Children are a very, very delicate issue in general and are a contentious issue because parents raise them, they love them, they want to cherish them, and they want to guide their learning. And communities may feel that they have more of a say than a government in doing that, which is why this debate is significant. Now, there's something I want to talk about in addition, and that is something which we sometimes call a problem-solution gap. Whenever a policy is presented, the question must be asked, what problem is the policy trying to solve? And then the question must then be asked, does this policy solve particular problems? And then you evaluate whether there is problem-solution synergy or a problem-solution gap. Now, let's be clear about what are the problems in the education system. Racism in schools is a problem. We've seen school children use the K word, the N word in videos on TikTok. We've seen issues being raised about racial inclusion in schools such as Pretoria Girls High School and other public schools where we see that, Black children, African children are not being treated in an appropriate manner or are being profiled for their hairstyles that they choose and those kind of things. These are problems that exist. The other side of the equation is to ask, what are the other problems that exist? So I'm just going to outline them so that you're aware. The dropout rate in the public education system is high. It's over 40% from grade 1 to grade 12. 40% of the people who start grade 1 do not sit for the matric exam. They drop out. Number 2, quality of passes is low. If you look at the quality of passes in maths and physical science at the 50% level, you'll see that those numbers are not adequate. If you look at the adoption of computer applied technology and IT as subjects, you'll see that the adoption is low. 42,000 people are doing CAT and 3,600 students set for the IT exam. This is out of 750,000 people who are sitting for the exam. So 42,000 sitting for the exam, 3,600 sitting for the exam. This is not great. We know from the Pearls and the team's international tests, right? Proficiency in reading and literacy and the trends in maths and science test, right? That 80% of grade 4s cannot read for meaning at the lowest level of reading. 80% of grade 5s and grade 9s are failing maths at the lowest level in international tests. So these are some of the challenges. We also know that 60% of university and TVET students are dropping out in their first year of study. We know that the throughput at universities is low and the throughput at TVETs is also low. So when you look at the system holistically, you see that of the 1.2 million students who start grade 1, you really don't get as many coming out of the system with either technical and vocational qualifications, diplomas, technical qualifications, degrees. So you're not getting plumbers, electricians, engineers in the kind of volumes that you ought to from the education system. These are some of the challenges. So the question then becomes, is this particular policy the right priority for the president, considering all of the other challenges that exist in the public education system? You may think that it is a priority, but it deals with quintiles 4 and 5 predominantly, and it does not necessarily deal as much with quintiles 1, 2, and 3, because those schools are relatively dominantly Black. They don't have these kind of challenges with racial inclusion, and they also don't always have challenges with what should be the second language of learning. It's not necessarily going to be Afrikaans. Options are provided. So this policy is addressing a small slice of schools in the main, and also those who are homeschooling. But in the bigger scheme of things, of the 12 point something million students in the system, this is not really addressing all of them or a majority of them or a critical mass. It is something, though, that may be able to provide participatory parity, which is, language equality in this case, for those who may not want to learn Afrikaans if the school is not predominantly Afrikaans as a first or second language school. Now, let's talk about the politics. Let's talk about the politics a little bit. Will the Democratic Alliance walk out of the GNU? They will not. They will not. At this point, they are in a very tight situation. Number one, they are the ones who made it very clear that they prefer this working with the ANC to an ANC and MK coalition. They think that it's the better evil. They think that it prevents a doomsday alliance. When you tell that to the ANC, just now we're talking game theory, that lets me know as the ANC that you're stuck with me. You're stuck with me. So the ANC is going to push through the NHI as they see fit. They're going to push through this particular Bela Bill as they see fit. The DA is not going to walk away. They may go to courts. AfriForum has said they're going to go to court. Freedom Front Plus probably going to go to court. This boycott, I think, is the gesture to show that they don't support this. But walking away, they're not going to walk away. They're not going to walk away. They're in too deep. Also, I think many of them of the ministers are enjoying being ministers. This is their first time in government. This is their first time at a national level, feeling this kind of power, being able to discuss national issues at a national stage. With that stature, I don't think that they're walking away from this. I think that they're staying in this. Now, will this bill solve the major problems in the education system? I don't think so. Will this bill take away power from parents and school governing bodies? To an extent, it will. To an extent, it will. This bill has gone through all of the processes, though. And I think there is one side conversation that is necessary or worth having for a little bit. And that conversation is about the public participation process. But before that, let's just look at the process the bill has gone through. The bill was introduced on the 8th. Sorry, it was introduced on the 10th of January in 2022. There were so many meetings around this bill. 8th of February, 15th of February, 19th of April. This is in 2022. 29th of June. Then November as well, right? And I'm putting that graphic on the screen so that you can see it. There were public hearings on the 8th of November, 15th of November, 22nd of November, 29th of November. These public hearings, I don't think, are adequate. And sometimes they are gamed by political parties because they pass people in, people have scripts, they read them, and sometimes criticisms are not acknowledged. But look at the process that happened. Then you had 6th of December, 2022. Then on the 21st of February, you had something. 14th of March, you had presentations. 22nd of March, 18th of April, 30 May, 7 June, 13 June, 20 June, 27 June. So a lot has happened here, right? In terms of the process of this bill. And then you look at the 26th of September there towards the end, the deputy minister was also making some presentations. The deputy minister actually was more involved than even the minister was in this particular stage, right? So this also makes me wonder about the balance of authority within the Department of Basic Education, because the deputy minister is still there. Siviwe Horube, she came in, but she doesn't have education experience. Her education training is not in teaching. And Regina Mhlaule has been in the education system for a very, very long time. She has been there for a very long time. And as you can see, she has been an intricate part of this bill. So this leads me to wonder really about the authority that the Minister of Basic Education really has in that department, and whether or not that appointment to that department was the best appointment for the DA as things stand right now. Having said that, though, there's a different conversation to have about the school nutrition tender, and I'm going to make a separate video about that. So look out for that. But yeah, man, the bill went through a lot of steps, and as such, it cannot really be said that it's not a democratic process. It did go through that, although there are some criticisms around public participation in general, not just for this bill, in general. And those are, I think, open for interpretation and conversation on another day. But the DA now finds itself in its moment of truth. I don't think they'll walk away, but this is their moment of truth. If they don't do anything at this point, then it's game over. Then they're just going to be a spectating participant in this coalition. Obviously, their ministers will still have authority, but they will not be able to provide co-leadership to the ANC around its mandate and what it wants to accomplish. This was something that they said was a red line. So it's their moment of truth, and we'll have to see how they play out. But I don't think the markets are going to entertain the idea of walking away, because the markets and the elites care about the value of the rand, the stability of the rand, over and above a lot of other things. And as long as, the privatization continues, as long as the rand is stable, as long as the Reserve Bank is untouched, they may be willing to sacrifice the majority of the DA supporters to preserve their own interests as business owners, owners of capital. And this will actually show that, the donors of the DA have different interests to the supporters of the DA, because the DA supporters don't support this, but the markets are not going to entertain them walking away from this coalition. They're going to have to eat their vegetables on this one, unfortunately. What do you guys think? Let's have a conversation. Till the next one.